ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد Alhamdulillah, all praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We always ask Allah to send His peace and His blessings on our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you look at the world we live in today and study it to some degree, you will invariably come to realize that it is predicated on a certain set of laws. And these are laws that tend to fall under different categories. For example, we have what are called legal codes or statutes. And these are laws which are enacted and instituted typically by federal and state legislators. And these laws, their aim or their purpose is primarily to prevent things like lawlessness, injustice, anarchy, and tyranny in the society. So most people can agree that laws such as these, they serve a purpose and they are beneficial, even though some may not be that pleasing to us. So that's one category. There are also what are called scientific laws or empirical laws. And these are laws which are arrived at by simple observation and through experimentation. For example, there is a law that water freezes at a certain temperature, at 32 Fahrenheit. We can observe that and we can repeat that experiment multiple times and we'll come to see that it'll freeze at a certain temperature pretty much every single time. Likewise, what goes up, it's going to come down sometime. The law of gravitation. When we put a force on something, impose a force on something, there's going to be a reciprocal force that comes back onto the object that delivered the force. So these are all scientific laws. And the nature of these is that they are descriptive and not prescriptive. Now what do I mean by this? These are laws which merely describe the physical workings of the universe. They describe for us the mechanics, the dynamics, and the function of the universe. But they are not prescriptive in the sense that they don't prescribe for us a way to live. They don't teach us how to orient our lives. They don't tell us what the right way to live is, the right way to behave, or the right way to believe, or the right way to act in the society. So this is another set. There are also another set of laws, and these are very beautiful and mysterious, wonderful types of laws. And these are not arrived at through simple observation or experimentation. These are laws which are much more, sometimes I would say, difficult to arrive at. But they can be. And they need alternative sources of knowledge to substantiate them. And these are typically arrived at by way of revelation, the scriptural sources. So for us it would be the Quran, the Hadith literature, and also by our reason. Not just simple observation, but using our reason. So for example, we could say it is a metaphysical law that the universe required something to put it into motion. Now, our revelation tells us, yes, there had to have been a creator, an originator, a sustainer, something that put this universe into motion so that we have all this movement around us. Likewise, our reason tells us that the universe could not have just been passive, and then all of a sudden we have movement. But it required, or it had to have required, an external source that was self-sufficient in and of itself. An external energy source, an unmoved mover, if you may, to initiate the workings and the activity in the universe. So these are metaphysical laws. And there's one I want to focus on today. And it's one which, yes, is arrived at by way of revelation and arrived at by way of our reason. And this is something that many of us are aware of. And we are taught by our deen, we are taught by what our minds teach us, that the world is, the world was, and will always be a place of pain, a place of suffering, a place of trial, tribulation, hardship, adversity, heartbreak, and tragedy. These are all characteristics that describe the world we live in, and this is how we understand the world to be. Now what I want to do now in this khutbah is hopefully provide a perspective on how we can deal with this or process this metaphysical law from a cerebral or psychological perspective, and also what it should mean for us practically, what it should cause us to do in the world. And this is purely my own perspective. One of the things I notice is sometimes we tend to pass things off as the Islamic perspective. Like there's one perspective. That's oftentimes not the case. There have been since the beginning of Islam competing narratives, competing views, competing understandings. So, how would we deal with this law, perhaps, that the world is a place of pain and suffering? How do we process this? There's a hadith, which I really like. Our Prophet said, "Ummati ummatun marhuma, laysa alayha adabun fil akhirah, adabuha fil dunya, min al-fitan wal-zalazil wal-qatl." And so our Prophet said, my ummah is an ummah upon whom is mercy. So in other words, it seems on the outward that we've been promised mercy. And my ummah is not going to get their adab or their punishment in the akhirah. They're not going to get punished in the hereafter. But instead they'll get their punishment in this world in the form of severe calamities and afflictions. Things like massive upheavals. Zalazil could be, earthquakes or something. And qatl, death, destruction, devastation, these type things. So what we see in this hadith is it does a couple things. One, it says, okay, we are promised good later, but we are promised trial, tribulation, pain, and suffering here. So, it could be perhaps what is happening to us here is in fact a right substitute. So, it's in other words, God telling us, deal with it here so you don't have to deal with it later. This is perhaps one way to look at this. Our Prophet ﷺ, he also said, مَا يُصِيبُ الْمُسْلِمِ مِنْ نَصَبٍ وَلَا وَصَبٍ وَلَا هَمٍ وَلَا حُزْنٍ ولا أذى ولا غم حتى الشوكة يشاكها إلا كفر الله بها من خطاياه. That a Muslim doesn't feel that every time a Muslim is afflicted with some type of exhaustion, or they're fatigued, or they become ill, or they feel sadness, or they're in pain, or they're in distress. All these things they feel, they are actually, in a sense, erasing the sins and erasing the wrongs that we have committed. So from this perspective, the harms that are befalling us, it could be perhaps that they are erasing the wrongs we did in the past. So they're actually purifying us and preparing us to meet our Lord in a state of purity, as opposed to meeting our Lord in a state of filth and defilement. So this is one way we can look at this, that the calamities, the trials, tribulations are actually good for us, perhaps. Now, this is something which I think is important to reflect on, because it affirms the fact that there may be circumstances, occasions, situations in our life where the outward seems a certain way, but the underlying is unknown. There may be an underlying reality towards everything we are witnessing in the world around us. And this is something, if you're a materialist or somebody who's trapped in the world of cause and effect, you're not able to see this, or you're not able to realize this. But when you really think about it, that it could be a reality, that everything that's occurring has an underlying reality. It changes our perspective. It changes the way we look at events, the good, the bad, everything in between. It really does. And this is really what for me, what Islam really is that it's essentially encouraging us, at least from my perspective, to alter our worldview in response to what we see in the world and what we see happening to us. And this is why Islam, I think, was so difficult for early people to accept, because it requires such a radical inversion of their worldview. And even today, a lot of Muslims, they have a hard time practicing Islam. Why? Because it requires such a radical inversion of our worldview. It's hard to admit, and it's hard to see that there are underlying truths to what is going on in the world. There are so many beautiful examples of our Prophet ﷺ. He was encouraging those around him to look at ordinary and mundane things with a different eye, so that perhaps you will see something you didn't see before. Like he mentioned the concept of bankruptcy. When you hear the concept of bankruptcy, you immediately go to, I lost all my cash. I don't have anything anymore. Or in this country, it might just be like people say I'm bankrupt so they can waive their debt or whatever they do. But when the Prophet ﷺ, he said, what is bankruptcy? What do you guys think? He said, what do you think, or who do you think a real bankrupt person is? And they said, that's easy. They don't have wealth, they don't have property, they're totally materially bankrupt. And the Prophet said, that's not what I'm talking about. So here, he was telling them to alter their perspective in relation to something mundane. And he said the bankrupt person is the one who will come on the Day of Judgment. They're going to have all their prayers in order. They paid their zakat. They did their hajj. They did their everything. But there are people who are going to come on Yawm al-Qiyamah like that. They also have a lot of sin. They slandered people. They did this, that, and the other. They killed people. They were unjust. They abused other people. And so all their good deeds are going to be taken from them and given to the people that they wronged. That's bankruptcy. That was the Prophet ﷺ trying to teach them what bankruptcy was. altering their worldview. And there are so many examples of this. You know, ordinary things, like power. You know, we tend to think power is being able to dominate others. But the Prophet said, you know, it's not physical dominance. It's not expressing your physical superiority, but it's in restraining anger. It's in restraining those passions when you want to express them. That's real power. So this is one way, I think, you know, one way we can take this is to really look at things from a different perspective. And that includes the fact that the world is a place of pain and suffering. Now, the next thing I want to look at is, what does this mean for us from a practical standpoint? Once we have realized, perhaps adjusted our worldview, and come to the realization that the world is a place of pain, suffering, tragedy, trial, and heartbreak. Well, what it should do, at least I think, is help us realize that we are considered, or at least in the Quran, we are considered shuhada al-nas, witnesses. We are told to encourage the good, discourage the bad, these type things. And so we should, I believe, be actively involved in mitigating and in minimizing and helping reduce the harms and pains in our lives and the lives of other people. This should be one of our primary callings as a Muslim community. And this is going to mean participating and contributing in the world and the society that we live in, and not thinking that I'm not supposed to contribute. But we actually are commanded. For instance, you know, one of the things I notice is there's sometimes this tendency to bifurcate or divide issues into things like, this is an Islamic issue, this is a non-Islamic issue. And so we will devote all our attention to what we think is an Islamic issue, and we won't devote attention to what we think is a non-Islamic issue. Now, I guess an example could be something like healthcare. Now, when I say healthcare, it doesn't seem like, you know, Islamic, but it deals with the society we live in and the place that we are in today, the context we find ourselves in. So if, for example, we have in this country tens of thousands of people, according to some studies, that are not surviving in this country because they don't have access to affordable and adequate health care and health insurance. Now this, someone can say, you know, this is a problem. But I see it as very much an Islamic issue because it deals with the preservation of life. And the preservation of life, at least in my estimation, is a fundamental tenet or teaching in the Islamic tradition. And so we should be involved in helping alleviate this. We should be involved in putting forth different alternatives. This is just one way to look at this. I think sometimes it's just, you know, oh, Islamophobia is something we should be dealing with. If it's Palestine, we should be at the forefront. No, I think Muslims should be at the forefront of all these things. We are called to be those who encourage the good, discourage the bad. And that means erasing, mitigating the harms wherever they may be. And whether they are afflicting Muslims or non-Muslims. You know, I think sometimes there's this prioritization of certain groups of people. You know, everybody is a human being and everybody has rights. And their rights should be honored by all of us. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله ولي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين. الحمد لله الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. There's one thing I want to say and add to this conversation, and that I think sometimes is not brought up as much, but I think I will bring it up, and hopefully it'll be something to think about and perhaps realize. Now, I mentioned, this idea that, the world it's really, it can be a dark place. It can be a distressing place. It's going to put us down. By its very nature, it's going to let us down, And another practical way of responding to this, and this may sound a little unorthodox, but I don't know why it is, but it's to make time for relaxation, to make time for amusement, even, in this world. Now, that doesn't mean, you go, like I'm encouraging people to, go smoke a joint or something. But what I'm saying is that we need to really find ways to express ourselves and explore our hobbies and find ways to enjoy ourselves in this world. I noticed, even when I was growing up, and even happens today, where there's this constant and continual disparagement of the dunya. Like, oh, the dunya is this, the dunya is that. Like, it's la'ib wa lahu wa zina, tafakur. That it's all these things. It's a play, it's amusement, it's diversion. It's this or that and this, that, and the other. And our understanding of our religion, it becomes narrow and narrow. And we become more serious and more serious and more serious. It's like we put a plastic bag on ourselves and our communities, and we're suffocating the creative energy, and the vitality of the Muslim community. And I think sometimes we just need to find ways to express it and be creative. It's not, sometimes people think, oh, the Muslim world, there's such a deficit. They're just so economically and materially bankrupt. They don't have good militaries, good governance. They don't have all this. Really, it's so much of this is a deficit of creativity. We just have to be creative. We have to be smart, intelligent, give, be poetic, be spiritual. And there are many different ways we can do this. And one way is to just relax. And I know this sounds kind of different from what we're used to hearing, but I think we need to hear that message a little more. Especially, in the time we live in. I really find myself, I don't know about you guys, but I find myself just getting gassed out, so many times, because it's just people filling up my screen with all the horrible things that are happening around me. And I just need to just get away from that. Just for a little bit, So I hope this message was beneficial, and I hope, inshallah, that you took something from it, and I hope that we can all improve our lives, that we can work to improve the lives of those around us, that we can be, excel at this, and be amongst those who are deserving of the title of Muslims in this time, and we pray that Allah give us the strength, the patience, the perseverance to keep going when it's hard. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم اغفر لجميع المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه ولا تكفروا وأقيموا الصلاة.
Yeah.